Hey guys, welcome back to part 17 of Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving by Mr. Peter Walker. We'll start with the sentence from where we left off and continue from there. Eventually, any inclination towards authentic or vulnerable self-expression activates internal neural networks of self-loathing. The child is forced to exist in a crippling state of self-attack, which eventually becomes the equivalent of full-fledged self-abandonment. The ability to support himself or take his own side in any way is decimated, because it's always about the other person, the parent, toxic sibling, whatever it is. And because you don't have any support, you end up going into that state of panic because you're a child and you need to be protected and you need to be comforted and you need to be educated and you need to have a lot of things that aren't being met. Those basic needs that a child it's not an option, it's a requirement. And when you don't have that, you go into attack mode, as it speaks of here. But you're a child, so you can't attack back. You're 4, you're 6, you're 8, you're 10, you're a small 14-year-old, I don't know. So you end up abandoning yourself, because if you're not there, then you can't feel it. If you can't feel it, you can't hurt. So that's how that happens. Continuing on with ongoing parental reinforcement, these neural pathways expand into large complex network that becomes an inner critic. That inner critic that dominates mental activity. So, to continue on with what I was saying, it's pretty much the one, or I guess two, or most, or maybe not most, the two people you're supposed to depend on and be comforted by and all that, your parents, are not there to do their job right. So you're left having to create your own adult. They will tell you what to do and reprimand you and judge you and do all those things that parents are actually supposed to do in a loving, compassionate way with their child, so that they know right from wrong, so that they know not to stick pennies in a Edison plug, or don't steal the candy from the store, whatever. Those teachable moments of authoritative type parental whatever isn't there. But because it's still needed, you still need somebody to tell you what this world and is about and what your role in it is. Well, you just end up collecting all the different things that were negative that your parents threw at you, most likely projected onto you, as is often the case. But you end up developing this critic in your head with all of their voices, until it becomes your own voice and you're calling yourself stupid. I did it just before this. On a couple of occasions, I was setting this new setup up, and I remember just saying a couple of things derogatory to myself out loud. And that's still the inner critic talking. It may not be a committee anymore of critics, but it's still there. So I don't know when that ever goes away. It may never, but you could certainly curtail it with practice as you become more aware of who you are as an adult and start living your life intentionally. Moving on. The inner critic's negative perspective creates many programs of self-rejecting perfectionism. Perfectionism is right there, right next to hell, which you wouldn't expect it to be, but it is, because no one's an island. And teamwork does really make the dream work. And if you meditate on those two ideas and none of them resonate, you probably need to do some work into that. Because to do everything perfectly by yourself is just a recipe for frustration and overworking and overstressing, and ultimately a heart attack by the time you're 52. With ongoing parental reinforcement, where were we? The inner critic's negative perspective creates many programs of self-rejecting perfectionism. At the same time, it obsesses about danger and catastrophes incessantly. Chapter 9 and 10 expand on shrinking and deconstructing these life-ruining programs. Until this is accomplished, the survivor typically lives in a varying degrees of emotional flashback much of the time. It's our stories, right? So you're talking about something with someone here in the now, and you find yourself incessantly turning the conversation into, oh, but back then, when I was being hurt and abused and confused, and my mind's still trying to figure it out, so I'm still trying to figure it out. So it's going to be brought into this conversation right here, right now, all the time. Those same exact conversations. No matter who you're talking to, somehow it always comes up. That's your mind still trying to figure it out. That's your inner child still going, I'm still here and I still don't fucking understand what the shit that was about, and can somebody fucking please help me with that? And you have to become aware of that and not ignore it, suppress it, but actually, hey, give it time and space and meditate with it. Come up with not a why of what it went, but just a conclusion as to what likely happened due to the patterns that you have figured out from doing this back work, as it were, your past work, your shadow work. Let's see. Okay, chapter 9 and chapter 10 expand on shrinking and deconstructing these life-ruining programs. I just said how we do it. Until this is accomplished, the survivor typically lives in a varying degrees of emotional flashback much of the time. The verbal and emotional layer of the abuse onion has many sublayers of minimization. What is minimization? Oh, it wasn't that big a deal. Sure, I got beat and put in the closet or whatever it was. But it's not like he or she killed me. I mean, I got out in 4 hours or whatever. These horrendous things that happen to a child that should never happen to a child. And then as an adult, you look back and it's like, it wasn't that big a deal. So they beat me all the time, or they raped me all the time. It's not a big deal. It doesn't affect me. I'm over it. That's minimizing. Don't do that. Oh, my mother never hugged me, but who gives a fuck? She was just a tough woman. No. You were a child. Your mama should have hugged you all the time. Don't minimize it. Accept it, grieve it, and then truly let it go to the capacity that as a human you're able to. And some things you won't be able to completely let go of, but you'll let go of them enough that it'll just make you sad instead of make you cry or make you angry. The verbal and emotional layer of the abuse onion has many sublayers of minimization. I have heard clients jokingly repeat numerous versions of this over and over. Quote, I know I'm hard on myself, but I don't constantly kick my own ass. I'll be more of a loser than I already am. In fact, I really need you to come down on me if I try to get away with anything. End quote. A childhood rife with verbal and emotional abuse forces the child to so thoroughly identify with the critic that it is as if the critic is his whole identity. Wow, this is a word. Disidentification. Disidentification. There's the word. English. What an interesting language. From the critic is the fight of a lifetime. Disidentification. So, not identifying with that identification that the critic has labeled on you, that you actually created off of what other people projected on you, is what they're saying. You need to learn to say, hey, who does that belong to? Is that really what I think of myself, or is that what people repeatedly told me I was, and then I went ahead and bought it as who I was? But it never actually was up to you, because you were too young to figure out that, no, you're not a loser. No, you're not a bitch. No, you're not lazy. That's just what they projected onto you. So we have to learn to disidentification from that, from the critic in the that's the fight of a lifetime. To liberate your identity from the toxic critic, you will have to repetitively confront it for a long time. So, I'll just deal with this one thing this one time, and then I'll get over it. No. To liberate your identity from the toxic critic, you will have to repetitively confront it for a long time. You will have greater success if you are prepared to forgive yourself for repeatedly collapsing back into the old habit of self-blame. So don't call yourself a loser for calling yourself a loser. You know what I'm saying? Progress is always a gradual back and forth process. It's an ebb and a flow. Think of an ocean. Think of your emotions as the waves in that ocean. Of course, the waves are going to come and go. It's natural. That's what the ocean does. That's what your emotions are going to do. Till you're calmer, till it's not a storm in your heart and in your head. You're probably going to have more waves then, but as you calm down and accept and forgive and are able to process, the waves will get smaller, but they'll always be there. I mean, it's an ocean, right? You're a whole human being with a whole lifetime of rights and wrongs and joys and not so joyful times. Let's see. To liberate your identity from this toxic critic, you will have to repeatedly confront it for a long time. You will have greater success if you are prepared to forgive yourself for repeatedly collapsing back into the old habit of self-blame. Progress is always a gradual back and forth process. Ironically, a pernicious type, and pernicious means causing great harm, pernicious type of self-hate can constellate around the self-judgment that one is especially defective because she cannot simply banish the critic. Don't get stuck in that game. You will be able to eventually get rid of the critic in your head, but it's probably going to take, like, say you're 40. It'll probably take 4 years. Jessa Reed talks about, she's a pretty interesting character and teacher lady. She's a pretty interesting lady. She talks about how for when you're changing your programming, it takes a year, a decade. So remember that and have patience with yourself. This is the typical toxic all or none thinking of the critic. Sadly, many survivors give up on fighting the critic before recognizing the myriad subtle ways it tortures them. Yet there is no more noble recovery battle than that which gradually frees the psyche from the critic's dominance. Psyche being, according to this, your soul, your mind, your personality. Who you are, your authentic self, your higher self, the you you're allowing to finally come out. That's, if you do inner child work and you successfully meet your youngest self that you can, you'll know how, you'll feel in your soul, you'll recognize the potential that was there prior to the abuse. And yes, that will hurt, but it's also beautiful. You can bring that with you to whatever adult age you are now, and lets a lot of that potential that's been locked up actually come out, because now you'll know it's there if you do that inner child work. Until this happens to a significant degree, there is minimal development of the healthy, user-friendly ego, where they talk about ego here, where there's the ego, there's the id, the ego, and the ultra ego. And so the id is like your basic stuff, like you're worried about food, you're worried about, if you're older, sex, if you're, basics of the human, the id of the human. The ego is, you have the good ego, you have the bad ego, depending on how healthy you are. And that's just the one that worries about, you're who you are in the whole scheme of things. Alter ego, I kind of forgot, honestly, but I think it's no, I won't speak on it because I have forgotten. But alter ego is, I'm not sure that's healthy, but it's something that I don't remember, so we'll move on from there. But the user-friendly ego is going to be the inner self-talk that encourages you to be a more compassionate, loving person to yourself and others. The non-so-healthy one, I'm sure we'll talk about here. There is minimal development of the healthy, user-friendly ego until we get rid of the critic. Let us look now at how emotional neglect alone can create a psyche-dominating critic. Emotional neglect, the core wound in complex PTSD. That's pretty big. Minimization about the damage caused by extensive emotional neglect is at the core of the complex PTSD denial onion, as they're calling it. Our journey of recovering takes a quantum leap when we really feel and understand how devastating it was to be emotionally abandoned. And you gotta love yourself to recognize that. Because if you don't love yourself, you won't give a fuck enough about yourself to go, that shouldn't have happened to me. And that sucks that it did. Now I'm going to cry about it because it hurts. Expect the pain. Cry as many tears as you have to and forge ahead. You will get better if you don't stop. If you persevere, just keep saying, I'm going to persevere, I'm going to persevere. An absence of parental loving interest and engagement, especially in the first few years, creates an overwhelming emptiness. Life feels I can't speak today. Life feels very frightening is what it comes down to. Life feels very frightening to the infant or toddler who is left for long periods of time without comfort or care. Children are helpless and powerless for a long time. And when they sense that no one has their back, they feel scared, miserable, and disheartened. And think of all the confusion right before you finally figure it out, that you're just not important enough, you think, to be remembered or thought of or cared for. I mean, just the torture of getting to the point of recognition, and that's going to be your possible conclusion because you're just a child and you have no one trying to let you know that no, that shit's not right. It has nothing to do with you. Your parents just fucked. They're damaged. They're damaging you now. So yeah, feel sorry for your inner child. And anytime you see another child suffering, you best help. You're a decent human being, you best help. Children are helpless and powerless for a long time, and when they sense that no one has their back, they feel scared, miserable, and disheartened. Much of the constant anxiety that adult survivors live in is this still aching fear that comes from having been so frighteningly abandoned. Many survivors never discover and work through the wounds that correlate with this level. This happens because they over-assign their suffering to avert abuse or easily seen abuse and never get to the core issue of their emotional abandonment. As stated above, this is especially likely to occur with survivors who dismissively compare their trauma to those who were abused more noticeably and more dramatically. Like I've told people that I've spoken to here and there about my abuse that have not been abused themselves in the same way that I was abused. They'll be like, oh yeah, they'll speak about being emotionally abandoned or physically abandoned, but they were never raped and they were never hit. So nah, Jeanette, your shit was way worse. I can't even relate. And I say bullshit. Yes, you can, because the core issues you experienced, and that's what it comes down to. Past the physical abuse, you can come all the way down. Did you have somebody there to protect you? Did you have somebody there to love you? Is the same as, did you have somebody present in the room? Did you have somebody there to love you? It comes down to you were not loved. So, no, the level of abuse is not really an indication of how hurt you were or how traumatized you were. It's just the basics. Were you remembered? Were you cared for? Were you loved? Let's see. This happens because they overassign their suffering to avert abuse and never get to the core issue of their emotional abandonment. As stated above, this is especially likely to occur with survivors who dismissively compare their trauma to those who were abused more noticeably and more dramatically. I find this painfully ironic because some people suffer significant active abuse without developing complex PTSD. Typically, they are spared, quote unquote, because there is one caretaker who does not emotionally neglect them. That is huge. And if anybody takes anything from this entire series, is that. Be that one caretaker that doesn't emotionally abandon a child. You could save the suffering in their life by a massive degree. Because if one person cares, they might not become a narcissist by the age of 8 because they had to shut down their empathy, which is, by the way, how narcissists come to be. By the age of 8 years old, a narcissist has already become a narcissist because out of necessity, they had to literally close down their empathy because their little child mind could not comprehend the neglect that was happening around them or to them. So have empathy for narcissists too. They were a child when they got that way. Moving on. Traumatic emotional neglect occurs when a child does not have a single caretaker to whom she can turn in times of need or danger. Complex PTSD then sets in to the degree that there is no alternative adult, relative, older sibling, neighbor, or teacher to turn to for comfort and protection. This is especially true when the abandonment occurs 24/7, 365 days a year for the first few years. Growing up emotionally neglected is like nearly dying of thirst outside the fenced-off fountain of a parent's warmth and interest. Emotional neglect makes children feel worthless, unlovable, and excruciatingly empty. I remember looking at walls a lot as a child. Just staring at white walls. Which is probably why I have so much stuff everywhere now. I don't like blank walls. I have lots and lots of stuff on my walls. Everywhere. I turn this around, but just trust me, there's stuff everywhere. I don't like white walls. There's a lot of white walls in my house as a child. And there was a lot of bad stuff that happened. But I did notice that as I became a more healed adult, I saw the architecture of places like Greece, which is a lot of white, and it looked beautiful. I took that as a sign that I was growing. Healing! Yay! Growing up emotionally neglected is like nearly dying of thirst outside the fenced-off fountain of a parent's warmth and interest. Warmth and interest. They don't just have to take care of you, they actually have to care about your mind, physically, but they have to take care of you as in encouraging your mind too, right? Wouldn't that be cool? Emotional neglect makes children feel worthless, unlovable, and excruciatingly empty. It leaves them with a hunger that gnaws deeply at the center of their being. They starve for human warmth and comfort, which is why we become codependent or people pleasers. The failure to thrive syndrome is where we'll end up here. When a child is continuously deprived of nurturing caretaker, Love starvation steadily increases and sometimes devolves into the failure to thrive syndrome. Failure to thrive is a term coined in the mid 20th century to describe the epidemic of baby deaths that occurred when new germ phobic practices were introduced into hospitals. The new standard was that nurses were prohibited from holding babies for fear of contaminating them. Instead, mortality immediately began to climb. Modern medical practice has abandoned this heartless approach because of the failure to thrive research. This research has since then corroborated by data from Eastern Europe orphanages where there was an insufficient staff to meet the contact comfort needs of babies. Modern medicine now accepts as scientific fact that principle that babies need a great deal of physical touch and nurturing in order to thrive. When I was born in 1980 in California in Los Angeles, I was at St. Francis Hospital, and at the time, they put babies that were premature into plastic boxes, and they had these gloves, plastic gloves, and the only way you could touch the baby is with these gloved hands inside of this box. And one of the first times that I really began to love my inner child and start to pay attention to it was when I realized that I was in that box the first 2 weeks or so of my life. And because I do know this new research that says, no, you gotta, I mean, the second that baby pops out, you don't go clean it, you don't go put a blanket on it, you immediately hand it to one of the parents or any other human being that's going to be a caretaker and let them hold the child up to you so that it knows that it's safe. It's vitally important. And so I had a lot of sympathy for my inner child when I realized she hadn't even been touched for the first 2 weeks. I think it was my mom. I asked somebody, I'm very talkative naturally, but I said, as a child, when I was stuck in that incubator, was I crying constantly? Yeah, it was my mom. I think it was my mom that said, no, you were very quiet. That really broke my heart. In my experience, failure to thrive is not an all or none phenomenon, but rather a continuum that stretches from the abandonment, depression, to death. That's interesting. In my experience, failure to thrive is not an all or none phenomenon, but rather a continuum, which continuum means a series of different things that stretches from the abandonment, depression, to death. Many complex PTSD survivors never thrived as babies. And by the way, I didn't either. I was, if you ever seen Beetlejuice, the young teenage girl, she looked like black under her eyes and very, very, very pale. When that movie came out and I came to the United States to visit my aunts and uncles, that movie was out on VHS and everybody's like, oh my God, you look like the girl from Beetlejuice. I got that for years because from the time I was a child, because I was premature and probably not touched for 2 weeks when I was born, sadly, I was sickly. I always had black circles under my eyes and I was very pale. And it was probably because of the way I was born. I was very premature to being beat out of my dad. My dad beating my mom up and then me coming out early because of it. And then those weeks in the incubator. No shit, I didn't connect with my mother. We were separated from the time I was born. I was beat out of her and then separated from her by this plastic and gloves. The doctors told her that I was supposed to die in the first, she's going to die. Oh, she's going to die in 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, 72. I guess she's going to live. So yeah, we never connected. And I was sickly until I hit puberty. Until I was about 11 is when I finally started not being always sick. So there, that's shitty but true. I believe that many suffered painful bouts of lingering near the end of continuum that feels death-like. Well, that's very poetic. Let me try that again from the top. In my experience, failure to thrive is not an all or none phenomenon, but rather a continuum that stretches from the abandonment, depression, to death. Many complex PTSD survivors never thrived as babies. I believe that many suffered painful bouts of lingering near the end of the continuum that feels death-like. Maybe that's why I was so quiet in that crib, that incubator. Several of my clients commonly have quipped that, or made clever remarks that they, quote, feel like death warmed over, end quote. Who's said that about themselves before? When they are in a flashback. Oh, feel like death warmed over. That's a casual way to put it. I've had some shit flashbacks. Moreover, some flashbacks will literally make you feel or put you into a nervous breakdown. And if you don't know what a nervous breakdown is, you should really Google that, because it's literally what it says. Your nerves, it's like they've broken, and all of a sudden your body will start to feel everything from temperature changes to feeling like the back of your head doesn't have your skull in it. I mean, just incredible. Like, there's no rhyme or reason to it. Your body just loses its shit because its nerves just start popping off, and you start feeling things that aren't even there. Or it can't be that bad. Moreover, I suspect that some traumatized children do die from their abandonment. Perhaps their immune system weakened and make them more susceptible to disease. Maybe that's why I was so sick as a child. Perhaps, as David Kalshit hints, they unconsciously gravitate towards lethal accidents to terminate their misery. This is a trigger warning. I'm living in a yurt right now that's been here for 24 years, and that little girl was a perfect little cherub of a child that was about, 3? Blonde curly hair and blue eyes. She was born in this yurt, and I got to meet her last year briefly, and then she kept doing weird things. She kept running into the street when cars were coming. She did that a couple of times the week she was here, and thank God someone was fast enough to catch her. But she kept doing things like that. We kept noting her putting herself in dangerous accidents. And a few months after they left here, we got the news that she drowned in a pool. But it was weird because we'd seen her try to get herself run over. We'd seen her do a lot of dangerous playing off of. Anyway, so yeah, I know that that's exactly what happened to her from what this describes. Sad that I actually know about it from experience of seeing this little cherub girl keep trying to offer herself